Let's welcome Vanessa Fox.
I don't know who to look at. So in the mid-90s, many of you may recall these days, I was working in the telecom industry, and I was working for this company out of Dallas that did network monitoring equipment for the telcos. And so these were the days when we had dial-up internet, and so not only did we have to wait for the web page to load, but like we had to wait for it to dial and for it to make the noise, then we had to watch the little timer because it cost us every second we were on. How many of you remember those days? Yeah, right. So, so we had that, and so I'm working, in the telecom industry, and this startup I was working for had this vision of, wow, maybe like the world of landline phones will eventually go away, right? They had this vision of, what might happen. Now, there was no broadband internet and there was no Wi-Fi, like to be able to do what you guys, like we may have complained a few minutes ago, right? But this didn't used to exist at all. So here's what they did. They said, okay, we have this idea for this cool modem, and it's a wireless modem. And the way it works is when you're not using your phone, which we didn't have these smartphones, right? Like we were lucky to still dial the 9 numbers, and to be able to talk from our car was really cool. So they were going to use the packets that were left over from mobile phone airwaves. And I did the tech specs and I did the marketing. So at the time that meant I had to design a box because that would be sold out the store so that people could buy this box. And this modem was $900. And they were like, who in the world will ever use a wireless modem? They could not think of any audience at all that would ever use a wireless modem. So they thought, well, maybe the police departments, because maybe when they're driving in their cars, they'll need access to information. So they spent a couple years building this technology, and they sold 2, ever in the world, okay? And so the thing is they actually had this vision that it was actually the right way to go, right? We have kind of moved away from landlines, and now we have the internet in our pockets, but what they thought it might be was not what it ended up with, right? And so if we take a look at what's happening now, we can't possibly predict what's going to happen, but we know that things are sort of in the midst of change and have been in the midst of change. But voice search, which I'm talking about, is not necessarily going to be it, right? When we think about voice search now, it's really an advancement of voice to text technology is what it really is an advancement of, right? It's not really yet an advancement of search. And when we think about search, it's become this ubiquitous thing that we not only navigate the web, but we really navigate our lives through search. And I think we don't think about that. And as marketers in particular, I think we forget about it a little bit because we're thinking about all these other things that are happening, right? Mobile, social, visual stuff, voice. But search is really how we navigate our lives. So a couple of years ago, some of you may remember that Eric, who was CEO of Google at the time, made this comment to a reporter that what Google wanted to do was read your mind. Do any of you remember this? They're like, we don't think you should have to type a search into a text box. Google should just read your mind and give you exactly what you want. And that was super, super creepy, right? But now, actually, it's kind of slowly crept in on us. And with Google Now, right, which is this Android, assistant, we can start to see the glimmer of that happening, right? So Google, you've got your, Android phone, and they've got your calendar on it, so they know where you're supposed to be going. They know where you are, right, based on your location. They know what you do every day, right? They might know, for instance, that you need to catch a bus, and then they might also know that the bus is late, right? Sort of independent of you. So whereas in the past you might have done a search, what time is my bus coming? Now the phone can just pop up and say, hey, you'd better leave now, because the bus is almost here. So and so when we think about voice search, I think what really is happening is the interface that we think about for search or the internet may not be the same as what we expect, right? We might walk into our house and the internet is just sort of in our house, like the Jetsons. And we may not have to do a search, so we might not even have to talk. It may just be that the house can tell that it's us who's come home and knows that it's 6 o'clock, and now we're going to order a pizza, and so there's going to be a coupon that pops up on the refrigerator that's going to automatically call the pizza place for us. Or there's no phones anymore, probably, so again, our mind waves will just go to the pizza place and order pizza. But so, I think what we need to do is actually even think beyond voice search and more think about what are the interfaces available, and what are all of the things that can be inferred by those interfaces, right? And so when we think about that, it seems kind of crazy, but there's two things I think to think about there. One is that in a way it's exactly the same as it is now, which is that if you think about search and you think about text search and think about Google, I used to work for Google and search, and so the big thing is about what's the most relevant page, what's the most useful page, what's the intent of people. That phone looks really broken, I'm sorry. Apologize for that. What is it that people actually want, and what's the page that's actually going to give them what they want, right? What's the highest utility, highest quality page? So when we think about sort of these new interfaces and these new ways of interacting with people, that part of it stays the same. And I think it's really easy to get caught up. I know when I talk to search with people, they always want to know things about the algorithms. How do the algorithms work? How do we rank? That stuff is going to change even more so than it does now, right? But I think that core of understanding intent, understanding what people want and how to best solve those problems is not ever going to go away. We are going to start to think about, okay, maybe they're in a hurry and maybe they're going to have this read versus reading it themselves. And so we're going to have to think about those types of interfaces, but the core of that, I think, remains the same. So I think as marketers or as companies interacting with people, the more we can sort of keep that in mind, I think we're always going to continue to be successful, right, as we go along. The other thing I think to think about is that right now, Google is a habit. That's just what we do. And so a lot of people have tried to break away from that, or we have these competitors. Some of you may have heard of Bing. I don't know how many of you have used Bing, but you've probably heard of it. But with these new types of interacting, that is our opportunity to disrupt the habit, right? So instead of, I'm going to go to Google and do a search, we might just pick up our phone and talk into our phone, right? So there is an opportunity to introduce a new habit to people there, right? And so I think that more so than the technology itself becomes a big way to change. And so that becomes about how can you be the app that pops up? How can you be part of the distribution of whatever this interface is? So if someone's driving in their car and they say, hey, where's the closest Mexican restaurant or whatever, you're somehow the app in the car. So the more I think you can think about things like that earlier to start to disrupt the habit. Because people talk to me all the time about, how do I get people not to search with Google? Well, you really can't, right? Once a habit's a habit, it works, it's good. So, I think that's the other thing that starts to happen. Particularly, I think, because when you look at something like a Google Now, and people have started to get a little bit upset with Google because they want to give people information now, not necessarily send them to a page. So some people are like, hey, now I don't get the traffic to my site or to my organization, because Google's just going to give people the answer. Because that's what Google's audience wants, is just the answer. So what are the different ways that you can become the answer, instead, I think are a big deal. Years ago, and now it seems like years and years ago because time flies really fast, but a few years ago, when the iPhone first came out, I was talking to these guys who had just started a company called Urban Spoon. Have any of you heard of Urban Spoon? So the iPhone was just out. No one had done any apps with it. now, it seems like the olden days before we had apps on our phones. But I was at this party and they were like, you have to look at this cool thing. Like we go in this corner and like they pull up their thing and they built this app, right, that I'm sure all of you know now, which is just like you shake the phone and it rolls the little things like you're in Vegas and it tells you where you should eat. And it was like revolutionary, right? It's just this tiny thing. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get an iPhone now. Like, that's it. I never know where to eat. And so even that, like, that was a small thing. But what they did was instead of you saying, I have to go to Google and search for what are the restaurants nearby, you pull up your phone. The phone knows where you are already. It knows that what you want is a restaurant. And all you do is like this. That's it. That's like the full extent of what you do is like you move your hand once and it spins and says, here's where you go, right? So it's starting to take that. So even back then, right, we started to see the glimmers of how can you use the context of what's around you to start to give people more information. So that's what I really think that we should think about when we're thinking about voice, right, is how can we really move beyond that and just think about how to give people what they want wherever they are, no matter what device they're using, no matter what interface they're using, and kind of be the go-to thing that they're looking for. And now I want to hear what you guys think about that.